to the Lydia and Spin with Lydia Lunch and Tim Dahl. Tonight, depends on where you are, our special guest is a very good friend of mine, Bob Bert. Bob Bert has been in many scuzzy underground New York rock bands from Sonic Youth, Pussy Galore, Chrome Cranks, John Spencer Group, and of course, especially the best band he ever played with, Retrovirus. I've known Bob since 1982, according to him. Can't wait to hear the story of that. Welcome, Bob.
Hello, Lydia. Hello, Tim.
Bob.
Yes.
Maybe we'll start at the beginning. What's interesting to me about you, besides many things, is that you were able to see so many of the bands most of the rest of us never did, like Iggy Pop early on, the New York Dolls.
Yes.
Who else? I mean, we're talking like the early 70s here, when you began your rock and roll
Alice
fixation.
Cooper, Love It to Death tour. Pink Floyd, Ummagumma tour. Just so many. I mean, when you were about 13, you were hitchhiking into Manhattan to go see these. I mean, what was the first concert you remember? The first concert I remember, my older brother took me to see the band at the Felt Forum.
Ooh, how was that? Did you care?
Yeah, no, I was very impressed.
Were you a Robbie Robertson fan?
Yeah, really early on. The way they switched instruments around. Lee Von Helm is one of the best singing drummers.
When was this?
Ooh.
69?
Yeah, late 60s.
But Bob, you told me there was definitely a transition when the bell bottoms were thrown out and you changed directions and you went to a lot of these early classic.
Well, look, I mean, when you're really young, you'll go see anything because you don't really know.
Exactly.
You want to see any concert.
Exactly.
Yeah, totally.
Exactly. You know,
what were some of the best concerts you saw, like, we'll say from like 69 to 73 in New York City?
Well, I wasn't really going I started going to New York City in the early 70s to see the New York Dolls and Wayne County and the Backstreet Boys. That's when I started going to the clubs to check out bands.
By the way, I want to just interrupt here because Wayne County I had written to as a 13-year-old, maybe 14. And Wayne County wrote back to me. And then when I landed the second time in New York at 17, Wayne County, 16, was the first person I met at Mother's. Not she, was DJing. And that's when I picked up the lead singer and moved into the ex-loft of Kitty Bruce. So again, the circle is complete. So Wayne County, did you see the Cherry Vanilla show with Wayne County?
I did not, no.
I did. When was that?
What was that, pork? No.
I saw some performance with Wayne County and Cherry Vanilla, and I don't know if it was 73 when I first ran away or 76 when I got here. Can't figure it out.
So Bob, it's what's interesting, and of course we've worked together. I know a lot of these stories, but the audience doesn't. Were you the black sheep of the family? I mean, your father won the Heisman Trophy for Notre Dame.
That would be a football trophy to those who don't care.
You grew up in I guess, should I say, somewhat traditional New Jersey Italian American family.
Yes.
And then somehow you fell in love with rock and roll, art, the underground, the transgressive world. Was there a specific moment where that switch went off, or were you kind of always peeking around the corner and looking for that kind of world?
I was the youngest of four kids, and there was a bit of a gap. So my parents were already dealt with the older ones, and
leave them alone.
And then and so I came up in that time, where the British invasion was starting to happen, and I remember when John F. Kennedy got shot and all this stuff, and I remember my father had a liquor store that was right next to a record store, so I would go in there and I'd see all these new records, and I was always intrigued by the weird ones like the Fugs or the Mothers of Invention.
Right.
And when I was for my 14th birthday, I was in a department store with my parents.
What year was that, Bob?
1969.
Bob has an incredible memory, by the way. He really does. I don't know if it's Facebook or he just has an incredible memory.
Short term, no, but long
term, yes.
So we were in a department store in New Jersey, and my parents said I could pick out any album I wanted for my birthday. So I bought the Fugs Tenderness Junction. So anyway, I was after about a few days later, I came home from school, and the record was in my bedroom, completely destroyed by my mother.
Whoa!
And what happened was we had a relatively small house, so all the bedrooms were close together, and I guess I was playing the record a lot. And
do you remember some of the lyrics, Bob? Oh yeah.
There was a song called "Wet Dream."
Which you've had many of since.
You know, yes.
Who hasn't?
But
No, he hasn't.
I don't really.
No, who hasn't?
So anyway, yeah, like, you know, my older sisters ratted me out that this record had bad lyrics, and they kind of.
God! I mean, you love your sisters, but Jesus, come on.
Yeah, no.
All
I
right,
know.
so anyway, they broke the Fugs record. That didn't deter you.
Oh no.
Hell no. Rebellion!
You know, as soon as I was older, I rebought the record.
Nice.
But really, I mean, visual art also caught your attention because, as you stated in one interview, I mean, it was visual art that actually brought you to see a Warhol exhibition.
Right. In my high school, I graduated high school in 1973, and while I was in high school, that's when, you know, Ziggy Stardust came out, Lou Reed's Transformer, and so I kind of made the transformation then of, you know, from hippie to glam, so to speak. And my art school class in my senior year of high school went on a field trip to see
Amazing.
Warhol retrospect at the Whitney exhibit, and you know
That kind of was it then.
yeah, that kind of turned me on, and also the very first Velvet Underground album, which I discovered at my older brother's hippie apartment in the late '60s, and I was just like, you know, first you know, the Andy Warhol cover sucked me in, and then when I listened to it, I was, you know, mind blown, and then later on, I actually. Like a couple of weeks later, I was down the Jersey Shore at Seaside Heights with my parents, and I won that album for $0.25.
Nice.
But what's interesting is, again, in the Lydian spin, we speak a lot about how these centrifugal circles form. So you got into the Velvet Underground, the Andy Warhol cover sucked you in, you went to his exhibition, and then eventually you ended up working at the factory doing
Right.
silk screening for years.
I was like, that was my fantasy when I was out right around high school. I just like, oh, I wish I was a little older so I could have been a part of the factory. I didn't realize at the time, like everyone was like shoving needles full of speed through their ass, you know, and whatever. But you know, I was just really intrigued by that
Never
whole
liked
world.
speed, never liked
One
speed.
day, I cut school and went to see the movie Trash at the 8th Street Cinema. And
How was that experience?
yeah, that was amazing. It was still one of my favorite movies.
Were you smoking pot yet?
I started smoking pot and taking acid at 14, yes, in
I mean,
1969.
a little bit of a late bloomer there, Bob. I'm just saying. I mean, I was doing mescaline and, well, pop wasn't it by 12, but anyway, you caught up quickly. So you went and saw Trash.
Yes.
And somehow, I mean, did you feel you had a manifest destiny to be like involved in that scene, or?
Well, I was totally intrigued, and at that time, even though I was a big fan and went to lots of concerts, being a musician was the farthest thing from my mind. And I had taken drum lessons when I was 12. You know,
and didn't think you would end up being a musician, even though you took drum
you
lessons?
know, once I moved out of my house at like 17 or 18, I never played the drums, and yeah, I was trying to be an artist, and yeah, that's what I was. So I went to school of visual arts. I took some art classes. I learned how to be a silkscreen printer. And I got my first job.
And this is again what year then?
This
Maybe
is I got my
74?
first fine art silkscreen printing job in like 76 or 77, and that's when I moved to Manhattan for a couple years.
What's always interesting to me, and a lot of the musicians I'm working with, especially the ones who have a name, they didn't want to be musicians. They just found music as a way to express their voice, their vision, their art, or just to be involved in the arts at all. And so, you know, for me, I was like, I'm into music, and so here it is.
Yeah, that's how most musicians I know were, but I was not like that. I discovered CBGBs in 1975, and there was like nobody there. It was
A little before the rest of us did, actually. It was probably 1 year before the rest of most people who were doing anything discovered CBGBs. Who was playing there in 75, Bob?
the first time I went there was Patti Smith and television.
How was that?
There was like 20 people there.
Was it amazing?
Musically, I wasn't that blown away, but the atmosphere
Fair.
of the place brought me back,
Okay.
and I started going there like 4 days
It
a
wasn't
week.
the smell of the dog shit.
It was the dog shit was there.
Smell of the chili.
That guy Merv with his yellow helmet is behind the bar.
And again, nobody can answer this question for me. How the hell did we all get into these clubs underage with no money?
Well,
Nobody.
the drinking age was 18.
Yeah, but we weren't 18 then.
Also, urban America was different then.
Nobody cared. When I was hitchhiking into Manhattan at 13, I could have walked into any liquor store and they
of
would have sold it
course.
to me.
We walked
York was
into
a-
every club.
Yeah.
Nobody cared.
Yeah, no one cared.
Street corruption versus corporate corruption.
Did you
Big
have
shift.
Did you have to pay to get into CBGBs? I never paid.
Of course, but it was only $3 or something
Exactly.
like
All
that.
right,
There we
Bob,
go.
Next question. Top 2 CBGB's shows and top 2 worst shows.
Oh, hey.
Well, the worst shows would have been later on because they just had 7 bands a night, and Hilly would put his bands that he managed on a bill,
I'm
Rude
fair.
Buddha.
Were there any classic era CBGB's shows that you thought just stunk?
Blondie, for the most part, every time I saw them there.
Yeah.
They were really one of the worst bands. Debbie Harry and Chris Stein were always supportive of the scene. But that is the No Waivers, would laugh because we called her Lollipop, although she was the most beautiful woman in the world at that point. But bad pop music is bad pop music. And they really were awful until they perfected and got a record deal. We just would laugh. Go ahead, Bob.
I fell in love with the Heartbreakers when Richard Hell was first in the band, and so I was going to see that. I saw them a good 10 times with Richard Hell in the band. And
Did you see the first show of the Void?
I was there at the Void.
I was there
first
too.
show.
I saw the first show of Richard Hell and Richard Hell and the Voivods.
Voivods.
Excuse me, Voidoids.
What's your
Excuse me,
story?
I want to say that again.
Sorry, go ahead.
Bob and I were both at the first show of Richard Hell
Yeah.
with Bob Quine.
Yeah.
And I think I was the first person to approach Bob Quine and tell him he was God and I was a huge fan. Now, how many 16 or 17-year-old girls are going to approach a bald man with sunglasses who has a screwdriver in his pocket? Well, that was me. So hence then after Bob Quine, of course, produced Teenage Jesus, played on my album Queen of Siam, was one of my good friends at that time.
Also one of the best rock guitar players of all time.
All time. And Richard Hell was amazing. Unfortunately, he has never done anything to live up to it since. His writing sucks. His music sucks. His first album was amazing. Go ahead, Bob. You were there. So was I.
Yeah. So I was just going there all the time. I actually really liked the 3-piece Talking Heads when they were first starting out because they had the most arty drag queen kind of audience.
Psycho killer.
And
David Byrne would run away from me.
yeah.
Scared.
Yeah, he was
Like most of them.
What's your story where the Heartbreakers heard about Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers and they wanted to beat them up or something?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's on YouTube. There's this. I actually found out recently that when the New York Dolls broke up, they were down in Florida and they had actually saw a flyer on a pole that said Heartbreakers, and they actually stole the name. So meanwhile,
okay.
but the Heartbreakers, I was going to see them a long time, and I remember walking into Tower Records one day and seeing this Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, like, what the fuck is that? And so
yes.
Very different, right?
Yeah.
Yes, Tom Petty made out better than them. And
Considerably, except for,
Oh, yeah.
well, what's interesting
it's
is
called 6 Feet Under now.
Well, once again, another band or songwriter I covered bit the dust because I did cover Tom Petty. Break down, go ahead and give it to me. Break down, yeah, I'll take it. Break down, oh, I bet you will. Just saying.
So
Back to the
there's this
Heartbreakers.
footage where that Bob Grund filmed that's on one of those Dolls videos where Johnny Thunders is walking the CBG. He's interviewing David Johansen on the street, and Johnny Thunders walks by, and David talks, and they're talking, and he's saying, "Yeah, we're going over to England with this guy. You remember Malcolm McLaren? Yeah." And,
Oh, yeah.
he goes, "Yeah, we're playing with this band, the Sex Pistols. They're kind of cute." I'd never heard
All
of
right,
them.
let me interject. First of all, my opinion of this is that Malcolm McLaren, who designed a band called the Sex Pistols in order to sell T-shirts, because the Sex Pistols really were
And a
not a
lifestyle.
band. Excuse me. Sex Pistols really were not a real band. They were manifested to sell a T-shirt.
And it was Richard Hell that he saw in New
controversy.
York.
And it was Richard Hell that really inspired what then became the Sex Pistols that had, one semi-good album that somebody else wrote. And what's unfortunate to me is not only is John Lydon an idiot, but that he had 1 or 2 good records after that, which was basically Public Image,
Yeah, first
Flowers
couple
of
Public
Romance. And the sadder part is that another amazing guitar player, Keith Levine, has never done a fucking thing since. Back to the story of the real Heartbreakers.
All right, so
or carry on. Actually, let's skip ahead.
all right.
You're seeing all these great bands in New York because you're like a couple of months older than we are. So how then do you get suckered into your first band?
Well, it was actually, I was working as a silkscreen printer in Soho at this point, and one day this a friend of mine came in and she showed me the No New York record, and I was completely intrigued.
Whoa!
And so,
Because it's hot out here for a pimp.
so I was totally into it because this was the latest. It was actually by that point. The whole CBGB's early scene, it kind of came and went within a couple of years.
No New York featured Teenage Jesus, The Contortions, DNA,
Well,
and
that's
Mars.
New York City.
Excuse
Yeah.
me, Mars, who inspired me immensely and my favorite band of all time. But go ahead.
So anyway, after hearing this record and becoming a huge Lydia Lunch fan and buying all her records and stuff, it kind of dawned on me because I was used to going to all these shows and seeing all these amazing musicians, drummers like Jerry Nolan or Clem Burke and all these fancy, and I said, and then all of a sudden it dawns on you that concept is so much more interesting than technical ability, and so I actually in 1979, I saw this little ad in the back of the Village Voice for a punk rock art show. So I went down and showed them my lithograph of Holly Woodlawn's head with this body I drew on it. And,
Holly Woodlawn, Warhol superstar.
and I got into this show, which at the time I was like mind blowing. This crazy, coked up black guy had this gallery, and he's just like, "Oh yeah, Lou Reed's gonna be here," blah 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 blah. And I'm like, holy shit, this is the biggest thing that's ever happened to me. So anyway, I became part of this art gallery, and that's when I met my future wife Linda, and so when we decided to live together a year later, she was from Jersey City. I was living on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. So we decided we didn't want to go to either of those places. So we compromised and brought me over to Hoboken. And then within the first year of Hoboken, we were at a club and we saw some friends' bands play, and one of them didn't show up, and we had a few drinks, and someone said, "Does anyone play the drums?" And Linda was like, "Bob does," and so I got up on stage and started jamming with these crazy people, and that kind of turned into my first band. All of a sudden, I started playing these shows. We started getting all
This
these
is like
shows.
76, 77?
No, this is like 81.
I forgot that you might be a little bit older than me, Bob. I started before
got
you
into it
did.
later. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
I started before you
I
did.
got a late start. I started playing music when I was like 25 or something.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
So,
She's mad.
Not at him.
Fair.
so I just that as bad as we were and as crazy as we were, it just kind of dawned on me like, hey, this is more fun than painting in my bedroom because people were coming up to me. I was meeting people.
Instant gratification.
Yeah, instant gratification.
Which is the hardest thing for visual artists. I feel like it's like, what is this?
It might never happen.
And I was, a worse painter than I am a drummer. So
Nice.
But you were a great silk screener, Bob.
Yeah, okay.
And I still have the Geronimo print you gave me for my birthday once. Well, it is at Thurwell's, but that's all right. All right, carry on. So let's fast forward here. How did you get involved with Sonic Youth?
Okay, so talking full circle, drunk driving, I just hated. He was driving me nuts. Part of our shtick was throwing stuff around the clubs, and I would play this one show. I got hit in the head with a hardcover book, and I was like, okay, I've had enough of this.
If it was a softcover book, you would have stayed in it.
It would have been a Hubert Selby novel. He would have been still in, but it
So I had tickets to see Public Image right after Flowers of Romance came out at Roseland, and I got up to go, and I had the bad flu or something. The room was spinning, so I didn't go. I was really down in the dumps for a little while, and then I was working I knew about Sonic Youth because I had read about them in the New York Rocker.
That was kind of the second wave, like post-no wave came like Sonic Youth and Swans, and I don't even know what to term what they did, but it was like post-no wave.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. So I was familiar with them because I read that Glenn Branca was putting out their first album. So I bought their first record when it came out, and I really liked it. So I went to see them a few times.
What songs were on the first record, Bob?
She Is Not Alone, The Burning Spear, The Good and the Bad or something.
Whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, that was
It was
when
an EP.
actually when they were interesting.
Yeah, because
And I have to say that some of the early Sonic Youth shows, to me, because I saw them very early on, were pretty transcendental. I mean, they were pretty amazing. And it was basically the guitar fury between Thurston Moore and Lee Ronaldo. I mean, it did have this sonic holocaust. There really was transportation. I mean, it transported you somewhere else, even when they had not. I mean, to me, their early days were kind of epic.
Yeah.
And really, I mean, they had a sound like no other, even though they had been influenced by others, but did not even know what they were doing.
Well,
I have to say, they were some of the best shows I saw.
The
from that
first couple
period.
shows that I saw really early on with Richard Edson, it was awful because they'd take like 20 minutes between songs, like retuning and doing all this crazy
the
stuff.
Grateful Dead of the no wave.
Yeah.
Very good.
So, yeah, I turned into more of that later on. But, Richard Edson only lasted a few months. They made that record right away when they started.
Confusion
he went
and
on
Sex
to-
or what? What album did they make with Richard Edson?
Just that first EP.
Okay, all right. So
Yeah.
anyway, how did you get suckered into it, Bob? That was the question.
Okay, so I saw a sign in Rocks in Your Head while I was working.
It was a record store.
A record store in Soho, and I
did it say?
took it down
Punk
and
rock art drummer
Sonic
one?
Youth needs a drummer. I took it down, called them up, and then I went and
Auditioned.
auditioned in Michael Gerard's cement bunker on 6th and B.
All right.
That would be Michael Gerard, the Swans. We'll get into him later because, actually, his manager has requested he be on this podcast. I'm still debating. Anyway, tell us a little about the early Sonic Youth.
Okay, so I played
Quickly.
my first Sonic Youth show November 3rd, 1982, and
That's when
where
we met?
That's where I met Lydia Lunch, and I was just like blown away that she was there. I was just like, oh my god, I could stop now. Everything would be cool.
Glad you did, Bob. Glad you did,
Lydia was, it was just like, it's not often you meet someone you worship and they're actually great and they're really cool people.
Awesome.
Did you still worship me, Bob?
So
you still worship me, Bob?
of course.
Nice.
Thank you, buddy.
All right.
Yeah, and then it went on. We went on the very first tours, which was down south and out to the Midwest.
And it was brutal then. I mean, touring then was really brutal.
It's still brutal if you're not.
It's still
no one
brutal.
knows you.
Look, it's not as brutal as it was then.
Nothing could be more brutal than Sonic Youth and Swans all in one van, 10 people with no seats. Every single one of them chain smoking cigarettes except me. And Michael, having fights with other members, throwing punches over you and stuff, and going down south and playing.
That would be
till, like,
Michael Gerard, who has and could be known as an ultimate asshole, but also a very nice guy.
Yeah, he always loved me.
And who was the ultimate asshole in Sonic Youth?
I don't know. Me? I don't know.
No, Bob, it was not you, Bob. It was the board next door. We don't need to.
I'm fishing a little bit.
Yeah.
Come on.
Well, to be truthful with you, those days were actually rough because we were one of the first indie bands to go to Europe, and we'd go over there for like 6 weeks at a time. The first tour I did, we didn't even have a van.
Well, I went before you did, but that's all right.
No,
because
I know.
many people did not go to Europe. It's like, I forced my way to Europe with Teenage Jesus and Ever After.
Yep.
And so did Sonic Youth and Swans, because we instinctively knew that Europe was where they understood what we were doing.
Yeah.
So did I.
And it was rough, but we did it. Exactly. So did Tim Dahl.
When I joined them, we were working on the first album, Confusion is Sex, and after those first 2 tours, they fired me and replaced me with Jim Sklevunos.
Right.
Who, by the way, was the bass player in Teenage Jesus, was in Eight-Eyed Spy, did play on my album In Limbo, and
Another sweet guy.
can't wait to get to him. But carry on.
Yeah, so then they and even though they fired me and I it was kind of cold and weird and I was actually kind of hurt, even though I was not a good musician by any chance, but neither were they.
No, they weren't hot. But they had excuse me.
Teasing.
They might not have been good musicians, but they had a vision.
Yeah, right.
And that vision did, in the early days especially, really manifest in something magical.
Right.
That's it.
So
Period. It
I
didn't
was
matter.
kind of
They had a vision.
shocked when that happened because everyone had been complimenting. I didn't see it
Do
coming.
you have any idea why?
Probably because Thurston was into hardcore at the time, and I couldn't really play like that yet, But like,
Well, I mean, they were never hardcore.
no, But anyway, so
I'm into hardcore.
And
I mean
could
porno.
any of the other drummers of Sonic Youth play hardcore?
well, I don't know. Well, Steve came out of the Crucifix.
Steve Shelley, it doesn't matter. All right, you know what? Sonic Youth to me is not the big part of your career because you were in it for a short time and you went on to play with many other people. Yes. So, I mean, like, for instance, and I do remember that Pussy Galore review I wrote for Force Exposure.
I knew that was coming up.
One of the most vitriolic pieces of fucking literature ever written. Doesn't matter. I always loved Bob. I do not like Trust Fund Babies. But Bob did go on to play with Pussy Galore, Chrome Cranks, have his own thing, Bewitched, play with John Spencer in various incarnations, and then eventually, because Bob and I have known each other so long, come to play with Retrovirus.
At a perfect time, too, because I had just gone through many years of misery, and then, all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God, and blah, 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 and then like Lydia called me up.
Well, that's Lydia's kind hand that a lot of people don't know about.
Well,
The benevolence of Big Mama Lunch.
I know the story, and I kind of reflected on my own.
Because Bob was in Retrovirus before you were, Tim.
For a year, sure. But Bob and you have a long history.
Well, and I'm going to tell you why Bob was invited into Retrovirus, because Bob is the man, pity or love him as we do, that has seen more of my shows than any other man alive.
That is true.
Because meeting Bob in 1982 as we did, Bob has visited me at almost every place I've lived.
But there's more to it. There's more to it. There's more to it.
I'm talking, Tim.
I know, but I'm about to give you a compliment. There's more to it. Bob suffered, his wife passed away, and guess what? And maybe you knew about it, maybe you didn't, maybe you had this hunch, but he got a magic phone call from you. Which,
right.
Hey, Bob.
Well, no, we were in contact.
What are you doing? And she hired you. I mean, that must have been. I assisted my dad's. That was 6 months. You did this over years, and that's happy. That's brave.
The trajectory is this. Bob and I knew each other for a long time. Bob is
We played on Death Valley 69 together.
Which is the best song Sonic Youth ever recorded, which Thurston and I wrote on the bus on the way up to Spanish Harlem, where I lived at the time. Anyway, Bob came to visit me in almost every place I lived, which was amazing to me because he would make the journey. And we shared many a divine dinner together at my place in Dumbo. Bob was just always on the periphery and always at the shows and always supporting. And I felt that he always understood somehow exactly what I was doing and what I was trying to express.
I saw Eight-Eyed Spy a bunch of times. I saw the Devil Dogs. I saw your
Nobody saw that.
I saw your first spoken word shows.
Really?
Yeah, the very first one.
That would have scared any other man alive away. Bob is a huge fan of Fingered, can quote it by heart.
Oh, yeah.
By the way, I hear the Marty Nation podcast, which will be the last of season 1. It's outrageous. So Bob,
so we're talking about music. You also had the zine BB Gun, which was had a huge cult following, and for my generation, tons of kids I knew were into it.
Well, and also got to showcase Bob's photography, because Bob is a pretty great fucking photographer, and hence has a book out of his photography now called
I'm Just the Drummer.
Ha ha ha! No, he's not.
But let's go back to BB Gun. I mean, this is pre-internet. It was kind of an archivist.
BB Gun was kind of something because it was just when the computers were starting, and it was in the earlier 90s, and I just decided to do it because I had access to all these people. I took my camera on tours that no one else did.
You've been taking photos for a long time, though, before that, Bob.
Yeah. We had a dark room in our first place. And
amazing.
So we just decided to do it, and actually, it was giving Linda something to do.
That's his ex-wife.
Yeah.
Late
wife.
And so I did the interviews. She did a lot with the layout, getting the advertising and things like that. And the first couple of issues weren't even done on a computer. They're actually old style, laying out on boards.
And great photos of me, Bob. Thank you very much.
Oh, yeah.
And a great article on me. Thank you very much, Bob.
You had Nancy Sinatra, right?
That was later on.
Quite a few stellar characters in BB Gun.
I'm one of the few people that had the guts to ask Nancy Sinatra if she had sex with Elvis.
And I don't know what her answer.
Her response was, "I wish I did."
You're listening to the Lydia and Spin with Tim Dahl. Our special guest is Bob Bert, longtime friend of mine. has played drums with Pussy Galore, Sonic Youth, Chrome Cranks, his own bands, and of course, Retrovirus.
So Bob, you interviewed Vincent Gallo with BB. I know you're coming. I'm sure you have a lot to say on this one, but I'm just prefacing it. You interviewed Vincent Gallo for your BB Gun magazine, and you were saying it was
okay. So I met Vincent Gallo backstage at a White Stripe show. He was with PJ Harvey at the time.
I love Jack White.
Yeah, so
what year was this?
I don't know, 2000.
Okay.
2. But so I set up the interview with him, and if you interview Vincent Gallo, he has to be on the cover, and he was all blah 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 blah. Actually, him and Richard Hell are the only two people I sent my interview to and let them edit it if they wanted to.
Well, because they're both extreme narcissists who have done very little in their lives.
So anyway, I meet up with Vincent Gallo, and he's being Vincent Gallo and making me.
So what has he done by 2003?
He's made Buffalo 66 and
already by that point. Okay.
He was talking about the Brown Bunny. In fact, so.
By the way, one of the things that I respect Vincent Gallo for most is that he had gone cross country, buying clothes by the pound, and then putting his label in it and selling it to like Cindy Crawford.
That's what he does. He drives cross country.
He's a grand hustler.
Yeah, he's the biggest hustler
going.
And
now he's a great real estate hustler. And by the way, I am one of the only people, Vincent Gallo, and I've never worked with him, has not insulted because he fears me. And he also thinks we're dirty cousins because we're from Buffalo and
same
Rochester.
area.
Yeah.
I have never worked with him, and I kind of love and loathe him.
So anyway, I'm interviewing him in the diner there on Avenue A. So he's talking about Christina Ricci, and he's like going on about the movie that she made after his, which was
insulting her, and no doubt.
Yeah, insulting totally ripping her apart. And then he's just like, and then she went on, she wouldn't promote Buffalo 66, and then she went on to make this faggot movie, and he kept saying faggot really loud, and I'm just like slicking in my chair. So before that, he goes, I have to use my own photographer, and I said, well, I could bring along Michael Levine or Richard Kern, and he goes, okay, Richard Kern is cool. So Richard Kern comes and he's hanging out with us while we're interviewing, he's taking pictures, and so after he's done, I said, okay, I'll show you the contact sheet and you can pick out what picture I want. He goes, no, I trust you guys. It's all cool.
Amazing.
So after the whole shebang is done, I mail him 25 copies of the magazine, and I don't hear anything. I don't hear anything just because, he was cool enough to do it, yeah. So I don't hear anything from him, so after a few weeks, I fish for a compliment. I say, hey, Vincent, did you ever receive those magazines I sent you? And he just writes back one sentence. Did you have to use the worst photo of me ever on the cover?
All right, period.
And then he's like taking the ones I sent him, signing them and selling them on his website for like $100.
All right, well, he tried to sell his sperm and nobody bought it. So anyway, let's cut to the chase here, Bob.
Yes.
Forget all these other nobodies or wannabes or narcissists. Eventually, besides BB Gun, which was basically your baby, you decided we also had Bewitched somewhere in there. You did your own thing.
Right.
You did your own thing, and so post BB Gun, what's going down?
Post BB Gun, well, BB Gun, the last issue of BB Gun was in 2004, and that's not too much was going down. I was like, after Pussy Galore, I was in a bunch of bands in the 90s. And then,
what was your favorite one of that period?
Well, then you're taking care of your wife, right? I mean,
I was I was still playing in bands, but there were bands that didn't get off the ground. I never stopped playing because I just thought, keep playing, and
Bob
you get
kept
better.
playing, but Bob is also a saint in my eyes because he did actually help a woman who was dying for many years. And in my eyes, Bob will always have a halo bigger than most because he stood by that, and it's a very painful thing to watch somebody disintegrate.
It was the worst.
It's absolutely unimaginable because you are putting your life on hold for somebody whose life is going to be exhausted and extinguished soon.
Right.
So for that, Bob will always be a saint in my eyes.
Thank you, Lydia.
It's unbelievable. I actually just got goosebumps saying it because it is actually unbelievable. And most of us would not have the time, the patience, the energy, or the devotion to do that. and we are all going to die. And if we only had Bob Bert at our side, Bob, you will never find my body. Let's go on to positive.
Well, I don't say it was like positive because I've worked with you, Bob, for 6 years. Emotionally, basically, what we're getting at is that you're very steady, and you've been around a lot of train wrecks, drug addicts.
Yes.
I mean, that you name it, and then of course you got great genes. Your parents live forever, right? Your mom's still alive.
My mom's still alive.
Bob, I pray we don't live to both be 89, but if we do, we'll know each other.
And anyhow, so how did
it's
you?
Amazing, Bob.
How did you manage? Well, you're around death of a loved one, but that's not the point. How do you manage? And this is a question for all musicians, artists, blah blah blah. Especially when you get in the game, how do you manage being around so much excess, so much narcissism, all this stuff, and
bullshitters?
You're a steady guy. You're a steady guy.
Yeah, sometimes
Pot
certain people get to me. Yeah, I'm a pothead, and I never. I was never a drinker.
Well, it's funny because you told me once. You go, when I worked for my parents' liquor store, and you saw the 7 a.m., 8 a.m. regular functioning people showing up and buying their booze first thing in the morning. Of course, not just them, also the train wrecks that live on the street. You're like, you know what?
I don't want to be anything like this.
Yeah, exactly.
So I never, never smoked cigarettes and never
how
drank.
Steady you are, Bob.
Okay.
And who is the most steady person you've ever worked with, Bob?
The most steady person I ever worked with? Oh, you.
Him.
By far.
Yeah, he said him. No, you didn't know. That would be me, him.
Yes.
Because that is one thing people might not know about me is I'm extremely, or as I like to quote Tim Dahl. Tim Dahl has said, Lydia, you're consistent. I am.
I know you are. I know you're consistent.
I am consistent. And the thing with Bob is he's consistent too.
Well,
because he's been around death, narcissists, bullshit artists, alcoholics, drug addicts, and idiots. And he still maintains kind of a very steady plateau of existence. And this is one reason why, again, this is like a full circle. Well, Bob and I know each other and are true friends for a long time because we have this consistency.
Yes.
As does Tim Dahl.
But I want to make a thread with what you were saying earlier when you were falling in love with music and you're like, concept over technique. For me, technique is not fast. It's about, can you consistently play the material from night to night? Can you realize the same design? But with touring and just living as an artist, consistency is kind of everything, especially if you're a performer. Can you turn it on?
And
Can you do all that
also,
stuff?
what's really important is the ability to improvise and to be in the moment. Because, look, you are you can be musically consistent because you're a technician. Bob and I might not be so consistent, but we have the vision and we have a consistency in the application of a vision. So that is how we kind of differ, but that is also where we come together.
Both.
Well, and I just want to say that playing in Lydia Lunch Retrovirus was by far the best musical experience of my life. Because, I knew the songs and I was a big fan. I had all the records, so it was kind of like, and getting to not only play with Lydia, but to play with Lydia's, her back catalog of her best songs is
Designed by Weasel Walter, by the way. So, Bob, now we're up to your photo book, which is a new release that you have, and also
Wolfmanhattan Project.
Wolfmanhattan Project.
With Kid Congo Powers and Mick Collins.
So let's talk about your book for a minute. You've been doing photographs and interviews for decades. So finally, somebody decided to give you the opportunity to release an incredible compendium of it.
Yes, I mean, people have been telling me forever, especially with modern media, that, I post all these photos all the time. Like, you have to do a book, you have to do a book.
Well, you are a Facebook freak.
Yeah. So, it's been a long time in the work, and I kind of laid it out. Finally, I found a company that really wanted to do it, and
it sold out immediately.
Yeah, a limited edition of 400.
Name of the book?
I'm just a drummer.
I'm just a drummer in a rock and roll band.
So the book is it's mostly photos. But the first half of it kind of covers my growing up life and the bands I was in.
And some edited entries from BB Gun as well.
Yeah, and also in the second half is mostly excerpts from BB Gun, yeah.
And so tell me about your new musical project. I mean, look, so Retrovirus was a great moment for all of us. I'm not saying it's over, but it was wonderful to have somebody in the band that really I mean, you and Weasel both knew and understood the trajectory of my so-called musical career.
Right.
And you were the first one I came to for that. And then Weasel volunteered and he brought Tim Dahl in. And that was a really pretty expansive concept and a wonderful experience. But now you also have, as always, as we always do, other projects. Tell me about the project with Kid Congo Powers.
Well, it kind of came together, Mick and Kid were talking about recording together, and I happened to be out in L.A. with Larry Hardy from In the Red Records, who was talking about it, and I said, I want to get me involved. So he just, of course, they both said yes, and then he put us in a studio. We recorded our first 7-inch and sold out.
What was that called?
It was called, A-side was Smells Like You, and the B-side was
If only it smelled like me, Bob. Well, let's talk about when I jumped in on a recording that you were doing on the Lower East Side somewhere. Because, I can do that sometimes.
Yeah, well,
So, good. You were recording.
We were
the new
recording,
project.
and you were popping by to meet me for a reason. And
Say hi and give you a kiss.
yeah, exactly. So we recorded this version of Lydia and Kid telling how they met and story with this music in the background. Lydia was actually waiting for the taxi to pick her up, and
Suddenly.
and the engineer was playing
Another song they had recorded.
Yeah, that had this kind of like tribal beat to it, and Lydia was just sitting there saying like, "Hey, fatty, yo, skinny, blah blah."
I don't want a skinny, give me a fatty, whatever that means to you. I'm just saying.
So we were just like, get on the mic, And
no biggie for me.
We cut it up and fit it into the song. It's really great.
Anyway, I just want to say this. This is the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch. Tim Dahl and our special guest, Bob Bert, who's been my friend since 1982, has seen more of my shows than any man or woman alive, has performed with me, has photographed me, has interviewed me, and now the tables are turned. And he deserves it. I love you, Bob Bert.
Oh, thank you. I love you, both of you.
I love Bob-a-lish.
Yes, and thank you, Lydia Lunch, for letting me work with Bob Bert, because I would have never known him otherwise.
Well, Tim Dahl is a stellar man of many contradictions.
A man who wears many hats. Oh, no, he only wears one hat.
He wears one hat, but underneath that hat are many different dimensions.
I'm from the anti-bullying generation. I can't handle this.
This has been the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch and Tim Dahl, special guest Bob Bert. Thank you very much.